Deck the Demon Halls by Felicity Heaton.
Everything has to be decorated.
A smile curled Sable's lips at Thorne's disgruntled and somewhat disbelieving tone as she riffled through the stacks of bags and boxes the demons had kindly set down in the grand hall of the castle, the result of several long shopping trips in the mortal realm.
Everything.
Her smile became a full-blown grin when she felt Thorne look at her. He huffed. She ignored it.
Get into the spirit.
Her face lit up as she pulled a long garland of tinsel out of one of the bags. Gold. Perfect. She was gunning for the opulent look, a color scheme that would make the most of the grand hall's thick black columns, dark stone floor, and grim gray walls. She loved her new home, but it definitely needed some brightening up, and she wanted it to look magical for the Third Realm's first Christmas. If she could nail it this year, Thorne would indulge her every year. Although she wasn't sure he was going to make it through this inaugural attempt at celebrating the season. She grimaced as he started stomping around, grumbling under his breath as he wrestled with the tree she had chosen, one that was going to look glorious once they had decorated it. He hefted it onto his broad shoulders, all 15 feet of it, and she had to pause to watch him, found herself mesmerized as the thick muscles of his bare arms and chest flexed and bunched beneath his golden skin. Damn, her man was fine. She barely bit back the urge to purr at him as he strode past her, looking glorious and more than a little tempting. A sexy grin tugged at his lips, almost stopping her heart as it fluttered in response. That grin stretched a little wider to reveal he knew the effect he had on her, so she glared at him, pinning him with a killing look. Scarlet flickered in his dark crimson eyes, highlighting his dilating pupils. She wasn't the only one getting fired up. She turned away before she succumbed to the urge to kiss him and walked to one of the thick obsidian columns that lined the strip of red carpet that ran from the arched entryway to the raised dais where Thorne's throne stood. When she put a little swagger in her step, a dash of a swaying hip here and a sprinkling of a bottom wiggle there, Thorne growled low, the sound rumbling around the room. She flicked her long black hair over her shoulder and glanced back at him, acting coy. His bright crimson eyes remained locked on her backside, and he absently ran his free hand down over his mouth, looking like a man starved as she tormented him. She wasn't sure she would ever get tired of teasing her mate, probably because it usually led to him losing control, and then things got hot and wicked, just the way she loved them. He finally dragged his eyes away from her arse and up to her face, huffed as he muttered, "Everything." That one probably had to do with the fact she had threaded blue tinsel through the loops of her black leather trousers. You could never have enough tinsel. Thorne stomped past her and she paid him back, drank her fill of his sculpted bottom. It looked delectable, firm and tempting, cupped perfectly by his tight burgundy leathers. She faux growled. He sighed and kicked his right hip, teasing her.
Keep that up and I'll give you a tinsel belt too.
Although she might be tempted to give him something else instead. Possibly the ride of his long life. He grumbled as he set the tree down near his throne. She really needed him to get into the holiday spirit before he ended up leaving her to decorate alone. She wanted this to be a joint thing, something they shared.
Have a glass of eggnog or something.
She wrapped the long length of thick tinsel around the final column on a diagonal, starting at the top of the ladder she had balanced against it and working her way down.
Nog.
Thorne arched an eyebrow at her.
What is eggnog? It sounds disgusting.
Sable hopped off the bottom step and taped the end of the tinsel to the column.
Oh, it is. It's quite disgusting.
So why do mortals drink it?
He slumped onto his dark throne and frowned at the purple tinsel she had wrapped around the arms of it, and all the crystal stars she had then hung from that. They twirled and sparkled in the light from the flaming torches, making her Demon King's throne look oh so manly. She had decorated her own, smaller throne in a mixture of gold and purple too, with added white glittery angels that were blowing horns. The stores didn't make demon ornaments, and she had figured he wouldn't appreciate her splashing angels all over his throne, not when one kept trying to pester her.
Because it's tradition, I suppose.
Although she had never liked eggnog, her first reaction on hearing what the pale concoction contained was the same as Thorne's. Gross. Give her a bottle of hellfire any day of the week.
Not every tradition should survive the ages.
He leaned back into his dark throne, and his eyes slipped shut as he stifled a yawn, flashing short fangs. He looked tired, worn down. The unrest in the kingdom had been growing recently, the citizens of the borderlands nervous as rumors of another war began to spread. It was weighing on his mind, and maybe, just maybe, that was the reason she was doing all of this. She wanted him to have a moment away from the strife in his realm, a break from worries that kept him awake half the night and distant in thought half the day. Tomorrow a whole new slew of guests were going to descend on them for a celebration, one which most of them had never experienced before. Thorne had invited a lot of people, the werewolf Kincaid, and a few of the vampires included, and the first king, Frey. The second king, Tegan, was bringing his cute-as-a-button succubus mate with him, and as long as she didn't turn on the charm with the other mated males, Sable was going to welcome her with open arms and not a sword under the chin. Those would be the only two demon realms attending. The rest could go to hell as far as Sable was concerned. Olivia was coming with her dark elf prince, Lauren, and Rosalind had promised to drag Vale along, mostly because her even darker elf prince was her ticket to the third realm. And Iolanthe was bringing Kiter and everyone else at Underworld, the nightclub they ran in London. That included Kavanaugh and Eloise, and apparently August was in town with Maya, and Sherry had convinced Talon that they should come too. And he in turn had mentioned it to Gray, who wanted to talk to Thorne about something, and so he was bringing his Hellcat mate, Lyra, with him. Hellcats were always crazy in some way, and Sable couldn't wait to meet her. Kavanaugh's brother, Harbin, had promised to come too, bringing his mate with him. Apparently that had caused Prince Lauren to ask Blue to speak with Fury, one of the elf assassins who worked with Harbin at the guild, about coming too. Lauren wanted them to spend more time together. Iolanthe had voiced concerns about the presence of Fury because Hart would attend with him. As far as Sable could tell, Hart had a sort of connection with Fury, a blood bond that ran deep, and it was necessary for him to be around his friend in order to make sure nothing overwhelmed the elf. Personally, Sable was inclined to agree with Lauren. Hart should attend with Fury, because she didn't want the tainted elf going off the rails and attacking everyone if something startled him or provoked the darkness that easily overwhelmed him. The trouble was, if Hart attended, Kiter would probably lose his shit about him being near Iolanthe. The two had a history, the sort that had almost involved wedding bells. Lauren had promised Thorne nothing would happen to jeopardize the celebration, and he would personally take responsibility for Fury and Hart. It had put Thorne's mind at rest, but not Iolanthe's, so Lauren had pulled out the big guns. Her brother Blue would attend, and together with Vale, he would be able to keep Fury under control. Apparently Fury viewed Blue as almost a younger brother to him, and admired the hell out of Vale, looking up to him like a father. The whole thing was some twisted shit, and she wasn't quite sure what to make of it. She did know one thing, though. If any of them stepped out of line, she was going to deal with them. Blue had begrudgingly agreed to drop in when his slightly wild and 100% awesome dragon mate, Terran, had apparently flown off in a huff for 3 days because he had initially refused to attend. It turned out that stubborn men really did bend to the will of their mates. She glanced at Thorne. Case in point. He hadn't wanted this grand party, but when she had told him how important it was to her, he had launched into full-on festive mode. She was sure she had far too many decorations, and she was just as sure that it was his fault. The last 3 trips to the mortal realm had been his idea, because he wasn't sure they had enough to make the celebration as special as she wanted it to be. Silly demon. Decorations were just the finishing touch, the sparkle to get everyone in the right mood. The important thing about the holidays was the people, being with friends and family, celebrating together and enjoying time away from everything. It was about sharing, reconnecting, and strengthening bonds.
What traditions has the third realm left behind?
She returned to the stacks of boxes to hunt down some baubles.
Did you ever celebrate something like this?
He opened his eyes and cast them around the enormous room, and the darkness in them slowly lifted as he gazed at the gold and red swags of material that swept between each set of columns, at the garlands of holly and fake fur that spiraled up those columns, peppered with battery-powered lights that had fascinated the demons who had helped her set them up. They still fascinated Thorne. His gaze caught on them, and he canted his head, curiosity filling his crimson eyes. The thick ribbons of gold and red tinsel she had wound around the columns between the garlands of holly and fir glittered in the lights, catching her eye and bringing a smile to her lips.
The elves celebrate the dawning of a new year at the winter solstice. You don't celebrate anything like that.
She dragged her gaze away from the decorations, shifting it to her gorgeous demon where he lounged on his throne, his chiseled bare torso tempting her to forget the decorating for a while and indulge in the other way of relaxing him. He shook his head, his expression losing all warmth.
Not for a long time.
Whenever he responded like that, she knew what he meant, and her heart went out to him. The kingdom had stopped celebrating the start of a new year when his parents had died, and he had been placed on the throne, a child in charge of an entire realm. Maybe her decision to celebrate the season would be good for him in other ways, could become a new way of ringing in the next year for the third realm, and they could add in some of the traditions he had forsaken while grieving his parents and struggling to run a kingdom. That darkness flooded his eyes again, hurt that he would never overcome, and she lifted the box of baubles she had arranged and carried it over to him, stopping before him on the raised platform.
Isn't there something you should be doing?
She hoped it would distract him from somber thoughts. He heaved another long sigh and pushed onto his feet, coming to tower almost a foot taller than her. She set the box of baubles down as he positioned the tree and returned to the stacks of bags and boxes to arrange another one, sure they were going to need more in order to decorate such an enormous tree. The biggest one she had ever decorated had been barely a fifth the size of the one Thorne had chosen. Demons always did things big. She raked her gaze over him, from his wild russet brown hair that curled around his dusky horns, over his wide shoulders, and down the line of his spine to his oh-so-fine backside and powerful legs. She wasn't sure she would ever tire of looking at every inch of the 6'7" heaven she had landed as her mate. He muttered,
"Is this side better, or this?"
He twisted the tree back and forth, stopping between each one to run an assessing eye over it. They both looked the same to her.
The first side.
She finished her second box, tossed an enormous carton of colorful fairy lights on top of it, and as much of the huge tinsel she could carry, and wrestled it into her arms. Thorne glanced at her as she carried it towards him, fighting it every step of the way, in danger of it slipping from her arms. He crossed the room to her, long legs swiftly devouring the distance between them, and took everything from her, easily carrying it to the tree. A tree that, now she was looking at it properly, was a disaster.
Are we going to have room for the angel?
She frowned at the top of the tree. It barely cleared the ceiling.
Angel?
Thorne followed her gaze, a confused crinkle forming between the dark slashes of his eyebrows.
It's traditional.
Her heart sank a little at the thought there might not be room. He sighed and muttered, "Traditional." Sable stuffed the tinsel into his arms.
Start decorating.
He fell silent as he went to work, unleashing his dragon-like wings and using them to lift up to the top of the tree. She watched him twining the tinsel around the branches, wishing she had the skill to use her feathered wings in the way he used his. Thorne had told her that control would come with practice, but she had been practicing as often as she could, and she still crash-landed most sessions, or slammed into walls, the black trees that surrounded the castle, the warriors who inhabited it, and sometimes Thorne. Most of the time, Thorne. He was always on hand, following her around at a close enough distance that he could swoop in and save her if she looked as if she was in danger of actually hurting herself. She was tempted to use her wings, to try them out, but Thorne cast her a look that said he knew what she was considering and to let him handle things for once. So she might be a bit bossy, but he didn't need to make her out to be a control freak. She did let him take the reins sometimes. Her body flushed at the thought of those times, and Thorne's gaze zipped back to her, that flare of fire ringing his pupils again.
Focus,
she snapped as he almost collided with the tree.
You are one to talk,
he grumbled, and she smiled at how he was picking up her way of speaking. Although yonder and other antiquated words still slipped into the conversation from time to time. He landed beside her, took the start of the lights, and flew back up to the top of the tree, his wings in danger of skimming the columns or hitting the ceiling. He was right, and he was better suited to this particular job. She probably would have hit the ceiling, knocked the tree down, and ruined everything. Probably? Definitely. She was nowhere near ready for flying in confined spaces. Sable followed him around the tree with the lights, directing him from the floor so he got them just right. When he was done, she let him decorate the upper branches, using one of the boxes of colorful baubles and ornaments, while she tackled the lower half of the tree. He glanced down at her, his gaze scalding her, and then away. When he did it again, she frowned at him.
You are singing.
His smile spoke volumes, told her what she could already feel in him, that her plan was working, and he was relaxing, enjoying this time spent with her in a joint mission to create peak Christmas, perfect in every way. She frowned and realized she had been singing Deck the Halls, only rather than the traditional lyrics, she had tacked in a demon here and there, so it started Deck the Demon Halls with boughs of holly. She also realized they had run out of baubles and other decorations. The tree was done. Almost. She returned to the bags and dug through them, tightness building inside her as she went through bag after bag and couldn't find what she was looking for. Her eyes widened and leapt to Thorne.
We forgot the tree topper.
She couldn't believe they had forgotten to get one.
Tree topper?
He arched an eyebrow at her again.
The angel.
She lifted her gaze to the tree, her eyebrows furrowing as she looked at it. Was there still time to go back to the mortal realm for one? The stores had been a crush this morning, and they had barely made it in and out without Thorne losing his temper and going demonic on the humans. Her eyes drifted over the tree. It was beautiful, colorful, and almost perfect.
Is it good enough without an angel on it?
Thorne swept her up into his arms, and she gasped and grabbed his shoulders as he beat his wings, lifting off the ground.
What are you doing?
She snapped and pressed against him when he flew closer to the tree, terrified of accidentally knocking it over and ruining their hard work. He swayed away from it and gazed down at her, the fire in his eyes born of a different emotion as they locked with hers, and his tone softened, his deep voice laced with affection and honesty.
The only angel I need is right here in my arms, but I could put you on the tree. You are the most beautiful angel there is.
She slapped his chest. He frowned at her.
I am serious.
She knew that, But it didn't make it any less embarrassing. It only made it more embarrassing. He landed with her, set her down, and brushed her hair behind her ear.
I want this to be perfect for you, but I am still not sure that everything needs to be decorated.
It absolutely does.
She grinned and glanced at his horns, at the red tinsel wrapped around their dusky curves. They had been the first thing she had decorated, expecting him to immediately remove it. She certainly hadn't expected him to put up with it for as long as he had, wearing it for almost a full day now. But as he looked down at her, she understood why he was enduring it, despite the looks several of his men had given him. He knew this was important to her, and that made it important to him too. He honestly wanted this to be perfect for her, because he wasn't the only one who needed to relax. Settling in as queen of an entire kingdom, her arguments with Archangel, the hunter organization she used to work for, and learning how to fly now that she had discovered she was part angel, had worn her down. To top it off, she lived every day looking over her shoulder, waiting for that damned angel who had threatened to haul her off to heaven to fulfill some sacred, bloody duty to come and find her. Although, rumors had it, he was preoccupied with dishing out a little justice to the dragon who had harmed Amelia, a hunter that had belonged to her squad at Archangel. Sable liked to think he had pulled the stick out of his arse and was using it to beat the shit out of that bastard.
Is it done?
Thorne stomped to his throne and slumped onto it again, looking as if he needed a jug of mead to take the edge off his mood. Or maybe something else.
Almost.
She went to the bags and found the item she had been sure to grab when they were in the mortal realm. His dark eyebrows knitted hard above his crimson eyes when she sashayed towards him and focused on her back to carefully unfurl her white feathered wings. She loved the contrast of hers to his. Feathers versus leather, light versus dark, angel versus demon. Although they were both a bit wicked. More than a bit. She tucked her hands behind her back, concealing what she held. Thorne's eyes narrowed on her.
What are you up to?
When she reached the dais, she kicked off and spread her wings, beat them, and lifted into the air. A little too fast. She slammed her free hand against the ceiling to stop herself from face-planting against it and quickly tacked the mistletoe in place above his throne. He spread his arms as she stretched her wings and drifted down towards him. He caught her as she landed on his lap and swept her down onto it, so her backside pressed against his thighs. His eyes remained fixed on the mistletoe as he held her, cradling her in a way that allowed her wings to drape over the arm of his throne.
It's the best part of the holidays,
she murmured, and he turned his frown on her. It deepened as she lifted her hand and skimmed her fingers down one of his horns, and his eyes brightened, burning like coals as she teased him.
A tradition I think you'll love.
He arched his right eyebrow at that.
A tradition? It is a twig. What sort of tradition comes from a twig?
This sort of tradition.
Sable smiled, leaned in, and pressed her lips to his in a soft kiss. She whispered against them.
People have to kiss when they're under the mistletoe. So, whenever we're sitting here, I have to kiss you.
He gathered her closer, his big hands pressing firmly into the curve of her waist and her knees, and kissed her, softly, reverently, her favorite sort of kiss. The one that told her how much he loved her, how much she meant to him, and how he was never letting her go.
I like this tradition,
he murmured against her mouth and kissed her again, slow and sensual, building the heat inside her with every sweep of his tongue and brush of his lips. She was starting to like it too. It was fast becoming her favorite tradition. He drew back and skimmed his fingers down her side as he surveyed the room, his eyes roaming over everything and lingering on the tree.
This tradition does seem very important to you.
He released her knees and stroked her cheek, feathering his fingers over it as he returned his gaze to her.
The third realm shall embrace it as a new way of celebrating the dawning of a new year. It is time that tradition was restored.
She leaned closer to him, snuggling up to his bare chest as she admired the tree. Angel or no angel, it was perfect. She tilted her head back and met his gaze.
We should get some presents for under the tree. It's another tradition. Is there anything you want?
He nodded.
When we were in the mortal world, I heard something in one of the songs, and, well, I know what I desire, but I am not sure it will fit beneath the tree, or that it would be content to sit there in a wrapped box like the ones I saw in the stores.
She frowned at that. Whatever did he want that wouldn't fit beneath the tree? He pulled her close, kissed her softly, stole her heart all over again as he whispered,
All I want for Christmas is you.